Filthy creatures like you belong in cages, not courtrooms. Those words would echo in Officer Martinez's mind for the rest of his life. Judge Keisha Williams walked toward the courthouse dressed in plain clothes, carrying a briefcase filled with the day's case files. Another street rat trying to sneak her way in. Martinez stepped in front of her, glaring down with raw contempt. His palm struck her face so violently that her head whipped to the side. The costly briefcase flew from her hand, legal papers scattering like debris across the courthouse steps. Martinez seized her by the throat, slamming her hard against the stone wall. Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courtrooms. Twisting her arms behind her back, he fastened cold handcuffs around her wrists. Other officers gathered, laughing as they filmed the scene with their phones. Kesha's jaw ached, but her gaze fixed firmly on the bronze nameplate above the entrance. The Honorable Judge K. Williams presiding. Just 20 feet away from her own courtroom, she was being brutalized by the very system she had sworn to serve. Could instant karma ever strike more cruelly? Inside, Martinez straightened his uniform and cleared his throat. He had played this role countless times before. Reshape the story, control the narrative, paint himself as the hero. The system always trusted police over so-called criminals, especially when those criminals looked like her. Your Honor, Martinez began smoothly, his voice calm and rehearsed. I was conducting a routine security check when I encountered a suspicious individual attempting to bypass courthouse security. He gestured toward Keisha, now cuffed at the defendant's table, a dark bruise spreading across her cheek. The defendant was behaving erratically, refusing to present identification, and became increasingly aggressive when asked to comply with standard procedures. Judge Harrison, a thin, pale man in his 60s serving as temporary judge, nodded with interest. And what exactly did you observe, Officer Martinez? Well, sir, she was dressed improperly for court and carrying what appeared to be stolen legal documents. Martinez's eyes glimmered as he leaned deeper into his lie. When I approached, she turned verbally abusive, cursing and issuing threats. From the gallery, Officers Rodriguez and Thompson exchanged glances. They had heard Martinez deliver these stories before. Different targets, same script. She kept shouting that she was someone important, Martinez continued, his tone dripping with disdain. These people always claim to be lawyers, judges, even senators, just to dodge accountability. I've seen this act many times, Your Honor. Judge Harrison leaned closer. Did she try to resist arrest? Absolutely. When I attempted to take her into protective custody, she became physically combative. I was forced to use the minimum necessary force to ensure safety. Martinez's hand quivered faintly, the only flaw in his polished performance. The stenographer's keys clattered rapidly, recording every false word. At the back, a young law clerk frowned, something about the account nagging at her. Officer Rodriguez, the prosecutor called. Can you confirm Martinez's testimony? Rodriguez rose, uniform crisp. Yes, ma'am. I witnessed the entire situation. The defendant was clearly attempting to bypass security, and Officer Martinez acted with complete professionalism. And the alleged assault? Judge Harrison pressed. Martinez stiffened. Your Honor, I used only the force required to subdue an aggressive subject who was threatening courthouse security. Any injuries she has are the result of her own resistance to lawful commands. He pulled out his phone, showing a video conveniently beginning in the middle of the confrontation. I have partial footage, though sadly my body camera malfunctioned this morning. The lie slid from his mouth with ease. How convenient, Kesha muttered under her breath. Excuse me? Judge Harrison arched an eyebrow. Nothing, Your Honor, she replied calmly, though her eyes burned with restrained fury. Martinez pressed on. This is a classic example of someone playing the victim after being caught breaking the law. She was trespassing, carrying suspicious documents, and when confronted, She immediately claimed discrimination. The prosecutor, Sandra Walsh, nodded in agreement. Officer Martinez, in your 15 years on the force, have you seen similar incidents? Too often, Martinez answered with conviction. There's a pattern. People who think the rules don't apply to them. They throw out accusations of racism to cover up their own crimes. It's insulting to real victims of prejudice. Several in the gallery, mostly white courthouse staff, nodded. They had seen the same stories repeated in the news, familiar and comfortable. She claimed she was here for work, Martinez said mockingly, making air quotes, but she had no proof of employment, no ID, and no legitimate reason to be inside a restricted section of the courthouse. Officer Thompson stepped forward. If I may, Your Honor, the defendant carried what seemed to be confidential case files. We suspect she may be involved in identity theft or fraud. Fraud? Judge Harrison asked with interest. Yes, sir. Martinez cut in quickly. The papers had judicial letterheads, case numbers, and sensitive data. No civilian should ever possess material like this. We believe she intended to impersonate court staff. The irony nearly suffocated the room. Still, Martinez pressed forward, blind to the trap tightening around him. In my professional judgment, he concluded, this is yet another attempt to manipulate the system. She knows if she makes this about race or alleged police brutality, she can distract from her real crimes. It's a calculated ploy for sympathy. He turned, staring directly at Kesha, his eyes cold. People like her think they can stroll into any building, any courtroom, any place they please. And when they're stopped, they scream discrimination. Not in my courthouse. The words lingered in the room like a toxic haze. Several staff members shifted uneasily, while others kept their expressions stiff and unreadable. Your Honor, Prosecutor Walsh added, the state recommends charges of trespassing, resisting arrest, and assaulting a police officer. The defendant's attempt to disguise this as a civil rights issue is nothing more than a desperate defense. Martinez permitted himself a faint smirk. Everything was unfolding exactly as he intended. Another case, another victory. Another reminder that the system functioned just as it was designed. People either knew their place or were forced to learn it. Additionally, he continued, emboldened by the approving atmosphere, I'd like to highlight that I demonstrated exceptional restraint. The defendant was clearly unstable, perhaps under the influence of drugs. A less disciplined officer might have resorted to far greater force. Judge Harrison nodded gravely. Your professionalism is duly noted, Officer Martinez. In the defendant's chair, Kesha sat motionless, her hands folded neatly in her lap despite the cuffs. Her expression remained calm, nearly serene, though a careful observer might have caught the faint curve of a hidden smile. She was recording every lie, every distortion, every detail that would soon bring Martinez's career crashing down. He had no idea he was performing in front of the very person capable of destroying him. Is there anything further you wish to add, officer? Judge Harrison asked. Martinez straightened proudly. Only this, Your Honor. Situations like this remind us why strong law enforcement is vital. Some people only respect authority when it's enforced through strength. The defendant learned today that actions carry consequences. He had no clue just how prophetic his words were. The state rests, Your Honor, Walsh declared confidently. The evidence demonstrates a clear pattern of criminal behavior and defiance of lawful authority. As Martinez stepped down from the witness stand, he locked eyes with Kesha one last time. He winked, a gesture of absolute dominance, of certain victory. It would be the final moment of triumph in his career. The defense may now present its statement, Judge Harrison announced, his voice suggesting this was little more than formality before sentencing. Kesha Williams rose slowly, her handcuffs rattling softly as she moved. Despite the bruise marring her cheek and her rumpled clothing, she carried herself with a dignity that made several observers shift uncomfortably. Thank you. Your Honor, Her voice rang clear and controlled, carrying an authority that filled the room. "I appreciate the opportunity to address these accusations." Judge Harrison blinked, surprised. Her tone was composed, professional, far different from the picture painted of her. "First," Kesha began, her eyes sweeping across the courtroom, locking briefly on each person who had upheld the officer's falsehoods. "I need to correct certain inaccuracies in Officer Martinez's testimony. He claimed I was trespassing. In fact, I was walking on a public sidewalk, approaching the main entrance of this courthouse at approximately 8:47 a.m. She turned to face the judge directly. "Your Honor, I'm sure you're aware of the Supreme Court ruling in HGV's Committee for Industrial Organization, which confirms that public sidewalks adjoining government buildings are recognized as public forums, where citizens hold a constitutional right to be present." The stenographer's fingers froze momentarily. The prosecutor frowned. This wasn't the emotional outburst they expected from someone in her position. "Furthermore," Kesha continued, "Officer Martinez alleged that I was carrying suspicious papers tied to identity theft. I'd like to examine that claim." She gestured toward the evidence table where her scattered papers had been collected. "Those documents are authentic legal files, pending casework, judicial memoranda, and official correspondence. All materials I am lawfully entitled to in my professional role." "Professional role?" Judge Harrison interrupted. "And what profession is that, Miss Williams?" she answered, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Dr. Williams, and I believe we'll be discussing my background very soon, Your Honor." A chill crept over Martinez. "Something about this wasn't right. Your Honor, may I continue?" Kesha said, her tone as assured as someone fully at home in a courtroom. "Officer Martinez also claimed I shouted profanity." Response: "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent regarding any alleged statements. What I will note, however, is that any words spoken were in direct response to being physically assaulted, without provocation, warning, or legal justification." The young law clerk in the back straightened. This woman's voice, her composure, it all felt familiar. "Now, about the officer's claim that his body camera malfunctioned," Kesha said, her voice sharpening. "Your Honor, I'm sure you are familiar with Federal Rule of Evidence 106, which permits the introduction of summaries of extensive records. I have every reason to believe that comprehensive video and audio recordings of this morning's incident exist, and will soon be available to this court." Judge Harrison leaned forward. "What sort of evidence?" "Your Honor, this courthouse is equipped with extensive surveillance, including high-definition cameras placed every 15 feet along the main approach. Additionally, the county operates automatic backup systems for all officer body cam footage, regardless of any claimed malfunction." Color drained from Martinez's face. In his rush to control the story, he had forgotten the courthouse cameras. "I formally request," Kesha went on, "that this court issue a preservation order for all digital evidence from this morning between 8:45 and 9:05 a.m., including courthouse surveillance, body cam backups, and mobile phone recordings made by any officers present." Prosecutor Walsh shot to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant cannot simply demand evidence without legal counsel," the prosecutor argued. Kesha turned toward her with a stare so sharp it made the woman step back involuntarily. "Your Honor, self-represented defendants have a constitutional right under the Sixth Amendment to present evidence in their own defense. Furthermore, Brady v. Maryland requires the prosecution to preserve potentially exculpatory material." The silence that followed was suffocating. This was not how these hearings usually unfolded. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "Miss Williams, you appear unusually well-versed in legal procedure. Do you possess formal legal training?" "I have some familiarity with the judicial system." "Your Honor." Kesha's words were deliberately measured, though her eyes sparkled with something close to amusement. She moved as far as the handcuffs would allow toward the evidence table, pointing at her scattered belongings. I'd also like to address Officer Martinez's description of my presence here as unauthorized or suspicious. She indicated a specific document. This is my daily court calendar, showing I was scheduled to appear in this courthouse at 9:01 a.m. this morning on official business. The bailiff, a tall man named Henderson with 12 years of service in that very courthouse, froze. Recognition spread across his features, quickly hardening into horror. Officer Martinez testified that I claimed to be someone important, Kesha continued. I made no such claim. What I did attempt to do was present my identification, an ID he refused to examine before launching his assault. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the room. Your Honor, despite Officer Martinez's interference, I still possess documentation that conclusively establishes my identity and the legitimacy of my presence here today. Judge Harrison shifted uneasily. What sort of documentation? Kesha reached into her jacket pocket with careful, deliberate movements. My judicial parking permit issued by this courthouse's administration. My building access card tied to my chambers, and my official identification. Henderson suddenly stood, his face pale as the truth struck him. He recognized the woman he had greeted almost daily for 3 years. Your Honor, Kesha said softly, holding up a leather wallet embossed with the unmistakable golden judicial seal. I believe there's been a grave misunderstanding about whom Officer Martinez attacked this morning. Perhaps we should recess to verify these credentials, her voice carried the natural authority of someone accustomed to commanding a courtroom, not submitting to one. Judge Harrison looked from the credential, wallet to Kesha's face, then to Henderson, who nodded grimly. Court will recess for 15 minutes, the judge announced hoarsely, his gavel striking down. Martinez felt his entire world begin to collapse. Whatever game he thought he had mastered, he was realizing he never understood the rules. The courthouse buzzed with unease during the recess. In a small holding room, Kesha sat calmly while Henderson fumbled with his keys, hands trembling as the enormity sank in. Judge Williams, he whispered, voice heavy with dread. Dear God. Judge Williams, I am so sorry. I didn't recognize you in civilian clothes, and when they dragged you in like that. It's all right, Henderson, Kesha said gently. You weren't part of this, but I do need you to do something for me. Anything, Your Honor. Anything at all. Go to my chambers quietly and bring my judicial robe, the black one with the gold trim. And Henderson, she added, locking eyes with him, bring my gavel too, the engraved one from my swearing in. He nodded vigorously and hurried away, leaving Kesha alone with her thoughts. She closed her eyes, drawing a steadying breath, centering herself with the discipline learned over 23 years on the bench. This morning, she had been Judge Kesha Williams, respected jurist, protector of constitutional rights, defender of justice. Within minutes, she had been reduced to a victim, a defendant in cuffs facing fabricated charges. But now, she would reclaim her role. Her confiscated phone, returned during recess, buzzed with missed calls and urgent messages. Her clerk, Janet Morrison, had sent increasingly frantic texts. Judge Williams, where are you? The Peterson hearing is in 30 minutes. Your Honor, the attorneys are asking about delays. Please call me back. There are rumors something happened. Kesha quickly typed a reply. Tell the Peterson attorneys we'll reschedule. Clear my afternoon calendar. Something more important has come up. Scrolling through her contacts, she found the number she needed. Chief Judge Margaret Carter, administrative head of the district. Margaret, it's Kesha. Kesha, thank God. We heard there was some sort of incident. Are you all right? I've been better. Margaret, I need you to do something immediately, and I need you not to ask questions. Of course, whatever you require. Contact courthouse security and instruct them to preserve and duplicate all surveillance from this morning between 8:45 and 9:15. Every camera, every angle. Ensure multiple copies are stored in separate locations. There was a pause. Kesha, what exactly happened this morning? A police officer named Martinez had just spent an hour on the witness stand, testifying under oath about how he bravely subdued a supposed criminal trespassing on courthouse grounds. Kesha's voice was steady when she spoke, but there was a razor's edge to it that Chief Judge Carter had never heard before. And that dangerous criminal, Margaret, was me, on my way to work. He didn't just arrest me. He assaulted me in front of the courthouse, called me a filthy animal, and said I belonged in a cage. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly half a minute. Finally, Carter breathed, "Jesus Christ, Kesha. What do you need? Should I call the FBI? The Attorney General's office?" "Not yet. First, I need those surveillance recordings locked down. Then I want you to make some calls. Every case Martinez has testified in for the last 5 years needs to be pulled and re-examined. Every single one. Consider it done. But Kesha, you can't preside over this case yourself. That's a direct conflict of interest." "In about 10 minutes, Kesha replied, her voice steel. "I'm walking back into that courtroom in my robes, and Officer Martinez is going to learn exactly who he assaulted this morning. And more importantly, who has the authority to make sure he faces the consequences." Just then, Henderson returned, carrying a garment bag and a small wooden box. "Your robes, Your Honor, and your gavel." Kesha stood, unzipping the garment bag to reveal the flowing black robes that had been her armor for over 2 decades. She slipped them on with deliberate calm. The fabric settled over her shoulders like a mantle of power, each fold a reminder of the oath she had sworn and the justice she had promised to protect. Opening the wooden box, she lifted out her ceremonial gavel. Its familiar weight was steadying, comforting. The engraving on its handle read, "Justice is blind, but she sees all." "Henderson," she said as she adjusted the robes, "when we return to that courtroom, I want you to announce me properly." "Yes, Your Honor." "How shall I announce you?" Straightening to her full height, every inch the federal judge she had been for 23 years, Kesha answered, "The Honorable Judge Kesha Williams." Presiding, she caught her reflection in a small wall mirror. The bruise on her cheek was still visible, but now it wasn't just evidence of Martinez's violence. It was a symbol, proof of how far the system had fallen, and a reminder of the justice about to be restored. When court resumes, she thought, Officer Martinez will learn what justice really means. All rise. Henderson's voice thundered across the courtroom, carrying such authority that everyone shot to their feet in an instant. What followed would burn itself into their memories forever. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Kesha Williams presiding. The words struck like a thunderclap. Martinez, who had been lounging against the prosecutor's table, went stiff as a corpse. Judge Harrison, seated in what he now realized was not his chair, turned pale as parchment. The prosecutor's jaw dropped open. Kesha entered through the chamber door in her full judicial robes, the gold trim glinting beneath the overhead lights. She carried her ceremonial gavel in her right hand, moving with the calm authority of someone who had walked this path thousands of times. The silence was absolute. Not a single breath disturbed it. She took her seat behind the bench, her bench, and settled in with deliberate composure. Her gaze swept across the courtroom, over every shocked face, every slack jaw, every mind just beginning to grasp the gravity of what had happened. "Officer Martinez," she said at last, her voice quiet but steeped in authority. "You may remain standing." Martinez looked ill, his skin cycling from red to white to a sickly green in seconds. "Your Honor," Judge Harrison stammered, scrambling to his feet, I mean to say..." Judge Harrison, Kesha cut in, her tone crisp but not unkind. Thank you for managing my courtroom during my unexpected delay. You may return to your own docket. I'll take it from here. Harrison nearly bolted, his robes flaring behind him as if he were fleeing demons. Kesha turned her eyes back to Martinez, who was trembling so hard he could barely remain upright. Officer Martinez, roughly 2 hours ago you testified under oath in this courtroom. Do you recall your testimony? Martinez could barely form words. Let me remind you, Kesha continued smoothly. You said, and I quote, "These people always claim to be lawyers, judges, senators, anything to avoid accountability." Do you remember saying that? Martinez gave a weak nod. You also stated, Kesha pressed, another entitled activist looking for a payday. I've seen this playbook before. Is that correct? The room was so silent the hum of the air conditioning roared in everyone's ears. And most memorably, Kesha's voice chilled to ice. You declared that people like me need to learn that actions have consequences. Do you recall that pearl of wisdom? Martinez's legs shook so violently, it looked as though he might collapse. Kesha reached beneath the bench and lifted a tablet computer. Officer Martinez, I'd like to introduce some evidence that has just come to my attention. She turned the screen outward for all to see. On the screen played crystal-clear footage from the courthouse steps captured from multiple angles. This, Kesha said evenly, is security camera 7. It has an unobstructed view of the main entrance. Her fingertip tapped the tablet, and the video began to roll. The courtroom watched in horrified silence. There was Kesha walking calmly toward the doors in plain clothes. There was Martinez stepping into her path, and then his voice, harsh and unmistakable, rang through the speakers. Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in. Several people gasped. The recording showed everything. The sudden slap that snapped Kesha's head aside, the violent grip at her throat, the cuffs forced on her wrists. But the worst came next. Martinez's own voice, venom dripping from every word. Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses. The words echoed through the chamber like a curse. A few jurors waiting in the gallery stood abruptly and walked out in disgust. Officer Martinez, Kesha said, pausing the video. Do you see any aggression from the defendant here? Any profanity? Any threats? Martinez stayed silent, his career crumbling before his eyes. Now, she continued, about your body cam malfunction. Her finger swiped, opening another file. This is backup footage from your own body cam, auto-uploaded to the county's cloud every 60 seconds, a system you apparently forgot existed. The new feed lit up the screen. Martinez's voice filled the room again, this time raw, uncut. Look at this uppity bitch, thinking she can just walk into my courthouse. People like her need to learn their place. Time to teach another lesson. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor, Sandra Walsh, scrambled to collect her papers, trying to distance herself from the implosion unfolding beside her. But Kesha wasn't done. Officer Rodriguez. Officer Thompson, she called out, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. You both testified under oath that Martinez handled this situation with remarkable professionalism. Would you like to revise those statements? The two officers edged toward the exit, avoiding her eyes. And here, Kesha pressed on, advancing. The video is the moment Martinez committed felony assault on a federal judge. From his own body cam. Her words hung like lead in the air. Federal judge. Martinez's knees buckled. He clutched the prosecutor's table for balance. But wait, Kesha said almost conversationally. There's more. She queued up another file. This is audio from Officer Thompson's body cam, which worked just fine this morning. New voices filled the room. Thompson muttered, Dude's really going off on this one. Think she's actually somebody important like she keeps saying? Rodriguez replied. Nah, man. Martinez knows what he's doing. Probably just another welfare queen trying to scam the system. Laughter from both men captured in real time as Martinez brutalized a federal judge. The few spectators who remained stared at Martinez with open disgust. Officer Martinez, Kesha said, setting the tablet down. Earlier you asked me for employment verification. She gestured toward the judicial seal above her bench, then to the engraved nameplate before her, and finally to the oil portrait hanging in the courthouse lobby. I've been presiding over this courthouse for 23 years. Every case you've testified in, every warrant you've requested, every search you've carried out, all under my jurisdiction. Martinez finally found his voice, a whisper rasping from his throat. Your Honor, I didn't know. You didn't know, Kesha repeated, each word deliberate. You didn't know because you didn't bother to look. You saw a black woman and you made assumptions. You saw someone you thought was powerless and decided to abuse your authority. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking on his. But there's something else you didn't know. The entire room froze. For the past 6 months, I've been conducting an investigation into patterns of misconduct and racial bias in this department, working directly with the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Martinez's face drained of all color. This morning wasn't random. You've been under investigation, and today you gave us the most damning evidence we could have hoped for. Kesha raised her gavel, her voice cutting like steel. Officer, Martinez, you were right about one thing. Actions have consequences. Court will recess while I consider the appropriate charges. The gavel struck the bench like a thunderclap. Martinez collapsed into a chair, his career, reputation, and freedom hanging by a thread. When the court reconvened 20 minutes later, the atmosphere was electric. Word had spread like wildfire. Lawyers, clerks, bailiffs, and court reporters had packed the gallery, drawn by whispers of the most shocking reversal anyone had ever seen. Martinez now sat slumped in the defendant's chair, his uniform wrinkled, his skin ashen. Beside him, a jittery public defender named Michael Carter, summoned at the last minute, kept darting anxious glances at his doomed client. Judge Kesha Williams returned to the bench with the same measured composure she had always carried. But now every eye saw her differently. This was not just any judge. This was the woman Martinez had brutalized, the woman who had stood up to him and was about to pass judgment. Officer Martinez, she began, her voice resonant with 23 years of judicial authority. Before we move forward with the criminal charges you now face, everyone present deserves to know exactly who you assaulted this morning. She rose from the bench and faced the crowded courtroom. My name is Judge Kesha Williams. I have served as presiding judge of this courthouse for 23 years. I was appointed to this position by Governor Richardson in 2001, and I was confirmed by the state Senate with a unanimous vote. Her voice grew stronger, each word a hammer strike. I graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law School, where I served as editor of the Harvard Law Review. Before being appointed to the bench, I spent 8 years as a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Martinez's attorney was scribbling notes at a furious pace, no doubt calculating how many years his client was about to face. During my time as a prosecutor, I focused on cases of police misconduct, civil rights violations, and systemic racism. I successfully prosecuted 47 cases against officers who abused their power. She paused, deliberately, allowing the number to sink in. In the 23 years I've served on this bench, I have overseen more than 15,000 cases. I have sentenced hundreds of defendants, From petty criminals to murderers. I have heard every excuse, every justification, every variation of criminal conduct. Judge Williams stepped closer to where Martinez sat, trembling. But in all my years of service, Officer Martinez, never, not once, have I witnessed such a clear embodiment of what is broken in policing in this country. The room was completely silent except for the sound of Martinez's strained breathing. You see, Officer Martinez, when you called me a ghetto rat, when you labeled me a filthy animal, when you said I belonged in a cage and slammed me against the wall of my own courthouse, you weren't just attacking an ordinary citizen. She moved back behind her bench. You assaulted the very person who has devoted her life to holding officers like you accountable. Judge Williams opened a thick file resting on her bench. This file contains detailed records of every case in which you've testified during the past 5 years. 43 cases, Officer Martinez. 43 times you swore an oath in my courtroom. She flipped through the pages. 28 of those cases involved defendants who were people of color. In 26 of those, you were the arresting officer. And in every single instance, your descriptions were nearly identical to the language you used against me this morning. Martinez's complexion shifted from pale to gray, acting erratically, refusing to comply, becoming aggressive, threatening officer safety. The same words, the same pattern, the same lies repeated again and again. Judge Williams snapped the file shut. But here's what you didn't realize, Officer Martinez. For the past 6 months, I have been working alongside the FBI's Civil Rights Division, the State Attorney General's Office, and the Department of Justice to investigate systemic racial bias and misconduct within this police department. The public defender stopped writing, staring at his client with something resembling pity. Your name, Officer Martinez, is already on a federal watch list. You've been monitored, your communications intercepted, your arrest patterns analyzed. She leaned forward. And this morning, you handed us the clearest, most undeniable evidence of racially motivated civil rights violations any prosecutor could ask for. Judge Williams lifted her gavel. You assaulted a federal judge while she was carrying out her duties. You did so based explicitly on racial animus, as your own words prove. Then you committed perjury by lying under oath about what happened. The gavel hovered above the bench. You asked me this morning if I knew my place, Officer Martinez. Let me tell you exactly where my place is. Her voice filled the courtroom with calm authority. My place is here, on this bench, ensuring that justice is delivered. My place is holding men like you accountable when they misuse the authority given to them. The gavel struck once. And my place, Officer Martinez, is to make certain that what you did to me this morning will be the last act of racial violence you ever commit as a police officer. For the first time, Martinez understood. He hadn't assaulted just any woman. He had assaulted justice itself. And now justice was about to strike back. Officer Martinez, Judge Williams continued, opening a heavy manila folder. Let's review your so-called distinguished career in law enforcement. Martinez's lawyer bent close, whispering urgently, but his client sat frozen, unable to react. According to internal affairs records, you have been the subject of 47 formal complaints over your 15-year career. 47, Officer Martinez. That's an average of more than 3 per year. She pulled out a document and raised it for the court to see. Let's begin with complaint number 1, filed in 2009. Mrs. Rosa Delgado, a 63-year-old grandmother, reported that you called her a racial slur during a routine traffic stop and slammed her face against her own car hood when she asked for your badge number. The courtroom murmured uneasily. Your department's conclusion? That her allegations were unsubstantiated. Interesting. considering we now have video of you using nearly identical words and tactics. She turned another page. Complaint number 12, filed in 2012. Jamal Washington, a 17-year-old honor student, alleged that you planted drugs in his backpack after he refused to give you information about his older brother. Again, your department dismissed the complaint as unsubstantiated. Martinez's breathing grew heavier. Complaint number 23, filed in 2016. Dr. Michael Johnson, a respected cardiologist, alleged that you arrested him outside his own home because you didn't believe a black man could live in that neighborhood. He spent 6 hours in jail before his lawyer secured his release. She fixed Martinez with a piercing stare. And what was the department's conclusion in that case, Officer Martinez? I don't. Martinez's voice barely registered. Unsubstantiated, Judge Williams said flatly. Do you begin to see the pattern? Chief Judge Margaret Carter had quietly entered the courtroom and was now seated in the front row, her expression grim as she took notes. But here's what's most revealing, Officer Martinez, Judge Williams continued. I've cross-referenced your complaint history with your arrest statistics, and the results are striking. She placed a large chart on an easel for all to see. Over your 15-year career, you've made 1,251 arrests. Of those, 1,089, an overwhelming 87%, involved people of color. And yet the demographics of your patrol area are 42% white, 31% Hispanic, and 27% black. She raised a laser pointer and highlighted sections of the chart. Even more revealing, she said. Your use of force reports show you employed physical force in 63% of arrests involving people of color, compared to only 12% in arrests involving white suspects. Martinez's attorney scribbled furiously, perhaps already planning an insanity plea. And here, Judge Williams continued, is perhaps the most damning statistic of all. Out of your 1,089 arrests of people of color, 432 cases were dismissed. Dismissed due to lack of evidence, prosecutorial misconduct, or constitutional violations. That's nearly a 40% dismissal rate. She fixed her gaze on Martinez. And do you know what we call it? When a police officer has a 40% dismissal rate for constitutional violations? We call it a pattern of criminal conduct. The courtroom was utterly silent, broken only by the scratching of reporters' pens. But wait, there's more, Judge Williams said, her tone now almost conversational. I've also reviewed the financial toll your actions have taken on the taxpayers of this county. She lifted another document. Over the last 15 years, the county has paid $2.3 million in settlements and judgments because of your behavior. She looked back at him. $2.3 million, Officer Martinez. That's more than the entire annual budget of some small towns. Martinez finally managed to speak, his voice cracking. Your Honor, I was just doing my job. Your job? Judge Williams cut him off sharply. Let me remind you of the oath you swore when you became a police officer. She held up an official document and read aloud. I solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the state constitution, to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and to faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of my office to the best of my ability. So help me God, she lowered the paper. Faithfully and impartially, Officer Martinez. Not selectively. Not based on race. Not guided by your personal prejudice. Judge Williams stepped away from the bench, addressing the entire courtroom. What we are witnessing here is not the misconduct of one rogue officer. This is the predictable result of a system that shields officers like Martinez, that dismisses complaint after complaint, that writes check after check to settle lawsuits, all while allowing the abuse to continue. She turned back toward him. But that system failed you today, didn't it, Officer Martinez? Because today you chose to assault someone who had the authority to reveal it. All. Martinez dropped his head into his hands. You spent this morning telling this court that people like me need to learn our place. Well, I believe it's time you learned yours. Judge Williams returned to the bench and lifted her gavel. Your place, Officer Martinez, is in the defendant's chair, facing the consequences of 15 years of criminal misconduct. The gavel came down with finality. And that is where you will remain. She stood tall behind her bench, her black robes flowing around her like armor forged from justice itself. The packed courtroom held its breath as she prepared to deliver what all present knew would be a historic ruling. Officer Martinez, she began, her voice resonant with centuries of judicial authority. Before I pronounce judgment, I want to speak not only to you but to everyone in this courtroom, and to all who will hear of these proceedings. She gestured toward the gallery, filled with attorneys, clerks, reporters, and citizens drawn by whispers of the extraordinary trial. This morning began with a simple question. What happens when an officer with a badge begins to believe he is above the law? What happens when years of unchecked authority and systemic protection create someone who thinks he can assault a federal judge and escape accountability? Martinez slumped deeper in his chair, his career and his life unraveling before his eyes. The answer, Officer Martinez, Judge Williams said, is standing before you right now. She lifted her gavel, the same one engraved with the words "Justice is blind," but she sees all when she first took her oath. For 15 years, you have terrorized this community. For 15 years, you have trampled on the constitutional rights of citizens whose only crime was existing while black or brown. For 15 years, you have dishonored the badge you swore to uphold. Her voice grew stronger, charged with righteous anger. But your greatest mistake was not one particular act of brutality. Your greatest mistake was believing the system would always protect you, no matter how many lives you destroyed, no matter how far you went. Martinez lifted his red, defeated eyes. This morning, when you called me a filthy animal, when you told me I belonged in a cage, when you slammed me against the wall of my own courthouse, when you handcuffed me and paraded me through these halls like a criminal, you thought you were showing dominance over another powerless victim. Judge Williams leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that forced every listener to strain for her words. But I was never powerless, Officer Martinez, and neither were the people you brutalized over the years. The difference is that today, justice had a witness. She straightened to her full height. Based on the evidence presented, your own words, your own actions, your own recordings, I find you guilty of assault in the first degree, a felony. The declaration hit the courtroom like thunder. I find you guilty of assault on a judicial officer, a federal felony with a mandatory minimum of 5 years. Martinez's lawyer closed his eyes, his head falling into his hands. I find you guilty of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, a federal felony punishable by up to 10 years in prison. With each charge, Martinez seemed to shrink smaller in his chair. And I find you guilty of first-degree perjury for your false testimony in this very courtroom. Judge Williams paused, letting the weight of the verdict fill the air. But Officer Martinez, this case has never truly been about you. You are merely a symptom of a much deeper disease that has infected our justice system for far too long. She turned again to the gallery. For too long, we have allowed officers to act with impunity. For too long, we have dismissed complaints, ignored evidence, and quietly paid settlements while permitting the abuse to continue. For too long, victims of police brutality have been told that their voices do not matter, that their truth does not count, that justice is not for them. Her voice rose, fierce and unwavering. But that ends today. What happened in this courtroom today proves beyond doubt that no one is above the law. Not police officers, not prosecutors, not judges, not politicians. No one. Martinez suddenly broke down, his entire body trembling with sobs that echoed through the silent courtroom. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never meant—" Judge Williams looked down at him with something that almost resembled pity. "Officer Martinez, your apology comes 15 years and 47 complaints too late. Your remorse exists only because you were finally caught by someone with the authority to hold you accountable." She raised her gavel high above her head. "But here's what you must understand. In your final moments as a free man, every single person you brutalized deserved the very justice you are facing today. Every grandmother you insulted with a slur, every teenager you framed with planted drugs, every doctor you arrested simply for living in the wrong neighborhood, they all deserve to see you here." The gavel hovered in the air. "Today, I'm not just delivering justice for myself. I am delivering it for every victim whose complaint was dismissed as unproven. I am delivering it for every family who watched their loved ones be brutalized while the system looked away." Her voice rang through the entire courtroom. "Officer Martinez, you told me this morning to know my place. Well, let me tell you what my place is. My place is ensuring that bullies like you can never again hide behind a badge while destroying innocent lives." The gavel came down with a crack like thunder. "Officer Martinez, you are hereby sentenced to the maximum penalty under the law. You will serve 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Martinez collapsed completely, his sobs now uncontrollable. "Furthermore," Judge Williams continued, "I am ordering a federal investigation into every case you touched, every arrest you made, and every complaint filed against you. The victims you silenced for 15 years will finally have their day in court." She set the gavel down and turned her gaze across the packed courtroom. "Let this be a warning to every police officer, every prosecutor, every official who thinks they can abuse their power without consequence. Justice may wear a blindfold, but she sees all, and eventually she comes for everyone." The courtroom erupted into applause that lasted 5 full minutes. Justice had finally prevailed. 6 months later, the impact of that historic morning continued to reshape the justice system. Officer Martinez was serving his 25-year sentence in federal prison, where inmates knew of his crimes through news reports. His badge, pension, and freedom were gone. The man who once terrorized a community now spent his days in protective custody, finally understanding what it meant to be powerless. But Martinez's downfall was only the beginning. The federal investigation ordered by Judge Williams uncovered deep-rooted corruption within the police department's leadership. 12 officers were fired. 4 supervisors faced criminal charges. The entire department was placed under federal oversight. Chief Judge Margaret Carter introduced strict new rules requiring automatic federal review of any case involving allegations of misconduct against judicial personnel. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers, backed by tamper-proof systems. Most importantly, the 432 cases Martinez had corrupted were reopened. Dozens of wrongfully convicted individuals were released. Hundreds more had charges dropped or sentences reduced. The county paid out an additional $8.7 million in compensation to Martinez's victims, directly from the police department's budget. Judge Williams herself became a national figure of integrity and courage. She was invited to speak at law schools across the country, telling how one moment of violence exposed decades of systemic abuse. Her message was constant. Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice delivered belongs to all. The courthouse where it happened was renamed the Justice Williams Federal Courthouse. A bronze plaque at the entrance reads simply, "Here, justice finally found its voice." The community also changed. Citizens who once feared reporting police misconduct began coming forward. Oversight boards were established. Training programs were overhauled, with Judge Williams personally designing lessons on constitutional rights and unconscious bias. The young law clerk who witnessed that day was inspired to pursue civil rights law. She now works with the ACLU, fighting similar battles nationwide. Officers Rodriguez and Thompson, who had backed Martinez's lies, were fired and federally charged with conspiracy and obstruction. Their recorded laughter at watching a judge be brutalized is now used in police academies as a case study of institutional corruption. The video of Judge Williams delivering her verdict became the most watched courtroom footage in internet history, with over 50 million views. Comments poured in from people worldwide who had endured injustice but had never seen accountability so complete, so public, so undeniable. Today, Martinez sits in his cell, likely replaying the moment he chose to assault a woman he thought was powerless. He thought he knew his place in the world. He thought he knew hers. He was wrong on both counts, because sometimes justice is not just blindfolded. Sometimes justice wears judicial robes. Sometimes justice carries a gavel. And sometimes, when the moment is right, justice strikes back. Never underestimate the strength of standing up to bullies. Share this story if you believe everyone deserves justice, no matter who they are or what they look like. Like this if you want more stories of courage defeating corruption, and subscribe because stories like this happen every day. And your story could be next. Truth always finds a way.